the reason why we have been trapped in samsara for a long time, is because of craving. And craving is actually the underlying reason, why we have actually been trapped in samsara for the longest time. Okay, so the Buddha has explained, that because of craving. Okay, and again, in Anguttara Nikaya 4.9, the Buddha also highlights. In terms of craving that may arise among the monastics, where the Buddha says that there are 4 ways in which craving arises in the bhikkhu, and the Buddha says which 4? Craving arises in the bhikkhu, because of robes, alms, food, lodging, and for the sake of life here and elsewhere. Okay, so the Buddha again emphasized, with craving as companion, a person wanders during this long time, going from one state to another, he does not overcome samsara. Okay, so you can see here, the root cause of samsara, itself is something that's actually very deep-rooted, not just among lay people, but the Buddha also says that craving may potentially also arise, among monastics as well, with regard to, the requisites, So, the Buddha says that the main reason why we have actually been trapped in samsara and unable to escape, is primarily due to the root cause of craving, which is tanha. So from these 2 suttas, we will have the initial answer, that the root cause for samsara is craving. Okay, and craving itself is not just. It's not just in relation to something that's pleasurable, like sensual pleasure, because most of the time we actually associate craving with just sensual pleasure. But if you look at other parts of the suttas, right, the Buddha actually mentioned, that the net of craving itself is actually more encompassing than just about sensual pleasure. If you look at Anguttara Nikaya 4.10 on bonds or fetter, something that binds you, right? The Buddha says, bhikkhus, there are these 4 bonds. Which 4? The bond of sensuality, the bond of existence, the bond of view, and bond of ignorance. So we can see here, the craving itself is not just confined to the craving, for sensual pleasure, but there's also this craving for the bond of existence, the craving for existence, and also the bond of ignorance and the bond of views, and these are the 4 bonds that actually tie us very close, very tightly, to this samsara, this unending cycles of birth and death, okay. So the Buddha then explained what is this bond of sensuality. It does not understand as they really are the origin and passing away, the gratification and danger and escape with regard to sensual pleasures, So this is where we are as beings, we are very much attached, to the 5 causes of sensual pleasure. That is the first part, on with regard to craving. But the craving itself is actually something that's even more encompassing rather than just craving. The Buddha says there's also this bond of existence, this craving to exist, where you crave to exist. Either in the form world, in the formless world, that is also the bond of existence that the Buddha actually highlights, as another part of craving. And the Buddha also says that there's also the bond of views, and where the Buddha says that. And how is there the bond of ignorance? The Buddha explains, this is where someone does not understand the origin, the passing away, the danger and escape, with regard to the 6 bases for contact, and the Buddha actually highlights, that this is actually this is actually then but the Buddha highlights this is the bond of ignorance, because you do not actually understand, the ignorance, you do not actually understand the gratification and danger with regard to the 6 bases of contact. That's why the Buddha says that there is this bond of ignorance. So from this sutta itself, right, we can see that craving itself, the craving is not just confined to craving for sensual pleasure, but also craving, for existence. and there's also the bond of views as well as bond of ignorance, which actually tie us very much to this, to this unending, cycle of birth and death, And again, in Sutta, in this Iti Vuttaka number 96, right, the Buddha again also spoke about, the bonds, which actually tie us to samsara. And as you can see here, the Buddha then makes a distinction between the bond of sensual pleasure, and the bond, of the bond of existence, So the Buddha says here, bond of being, the Buddha says is bond of being, which is bond of existence. So the Buddha says, one bound by the bond of sensual desire and by the bond of being is a returner. If you actually have not removed the bond of sensual desire and this bond of being, so you are bound to come back to this world. Okay, but the Buddha says, one freed of sensual desire, but still bound by the bond of existence, is a non-returner. This is where we know this the anagami, right? Because the anagami has actually removed the bond of sensual desire, but he still has the bond of existence, which means, that he still has the craving and the desire to be born in the form and the formless world. So the anagami is one who does not come back to this state, to the human realm, and also does not come back, to the sense realm, but he actually still has this craving, to be reborn in the form and formless world. And of course the Buddha says, one freed from the bond of sensual desire and freed from the bond of being and from the bond of existence, and that is an arahant, because an arahant has actually removed the bond of sensual desire and also the bond of existence. So we can see here, right, craving itself is is actually something that's very deep rooted. You have this craving for sensual desire, sensual pleasure, and you also have this born for existence, where you have this craving to be born in the form and formless world. And which is why, if you look at the Dhamma taught by the Buddha, right, the Buddha has classified and enumerated 10 fetters, right, to be removed before one can achieve arahantship, and be liberated from samsara. You can see from SN 45.179, right, the Buddha actually speaks of the lower fetters, where the lower fetters here, the Buddha actually talks about, the 5 lower fetters. We have this identity view, doubt, and then in terms of the misapprehension of precepts, okay, and precepts of observance, and we also have sensual desire and ill will. So the Buddha says these are actually the 5 lower fetters, right? You can see the Sakaya Ditti, you have which is the identity view, and you also have the doubt, which is Vichikicha, and also you have this attachment, to rules and observances, which is Silabhata Paramasa. So these are the lower fetters, which if someone actually attains stream entry, then he would have actually removed the 3 lower fetters, and of course the Sakadagami, is someone who is able to attenuate, and weakens the fetters of sensual desire and evil. But an anagami is someone who has actually been able to remove the fetter of sensual desire and ill will. That's why, in the earlier sutta, the Buddha says, right, if a non-returner has actually removed the bond of sensual desire, but he has not removed the bond of existence, which is the craving to be reborn in a form and formless world. So an anagami would have actually removed the 5 lower fetters, but he has actually not removed the higher fetters, which is the 5 higher fetters, where we actually have the desire for rebirth in the realm of luminous form, desire for rebirth in the formless realm, and we have the conceit, restlessness, and ignorance. So these are the 5 higher fetters, which the Buddha actually highlights that will need to be uprooted, and remove in order for one to attain arahantship. So that's why you can see here the 5 lower fetters and the 5 lower fetters and the 5 higher fetters, they are actually very in line, with what the Buddha taught in terms of the bondage as well as craving, which actually bind us to this unending cycle of samsara. And even if you look at the Samyutta Nikaya 47.50 about the taints, where the Buddha actually spoke about taints, which is what we call asavas, right? Normally when we actually, after we have done perhaps an wholesome deed, where we actually make an aspiration for us to be able to uproot the asavas, where we say like idame punyam asava kaya vaham, asava kaya means that we try to remove the taints, right? May these merits be conducive towards my removal of these taints. So when we talk about asava, this is actually what the Buddha talks about, the 3 taints. And if you look at the taints, also they actually mirror the bondage and the craving that the Buddha spoke about, in terms of craving for sensual desire and craving for existence, and also the bondage of ignorance, right? So actually, if you look at the asavas listed by the Buddha are also in line, and very consistent with what the Buddha taught in terms of bondage, and also craving. Where you can see here, the Buddha says the taints comprise the 3 types here. The taint of sensuality, and the taint of existence and the taint of ignorance. So as you can see here, this craving, and the clinging, the attachment, and also the which is the cause, why we are still very much trapped and unable to escape, from samsara, is something that's actually very deep rooted. As you can see here, it is something that's very, very deep rooted, that has actually been ingrained in us for the longest time. That's why the Buddha says that this samsara, is actually inconceivable from the beginning, and inconceivable will be the end, because we have actually been here for the longest time, but it's just that we're not able to to achieve the breakthrough to the Dhamma. That's able to that will enable us to actually then break the cycle, But instead, we are going through this vicious cycle, of going through samsara because of what? Because of craving, and because of attachment, and because of attachment, craving, because of the bondage, and we crave for sensual desire, and we also then crave, for existence, and these are the main root cause, why we are still trapped and unable to actually extricate ourselves from samsara. Okay, so again, the Buddha in this Samyutta Nikaya 36.3 then also goes a step further, and actually then also spoke about, well, how does we know that craving is the root cause, that actually results in clinging, and results in attachment, upadana, and because of attachment also, then it results, this in turn is a condition, for being bhava, and then from bhava we then have birth, death, pain, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. That's the whole cycle of this condition arising that we know, right? That explains why we keep on getting reborn, and there's this we cannot escape from birth because of this craving. But the Buddha says that, do you actually know the condition of why craving arises? So in this sutta itself, the Buddha then talks about the condition of feeling, that causes craving to arise, which is very much in line, with what we understand from the Paticca Samuppada, right? Where the Buddha says in this sutta, he says that there are these 3 feelings. What 3? Pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Okay, the Buddha now goes into the condition of feeling, that is the root cause for craving and clinging to arise, and the whole spectrum of suffering then arises, right? So then the Buddha says the underlying tendency to lust should be abandoned with regard to pleasant feeling, and the underlying tendency to aversion should be abandoned with regard to painful feeling, and the underlying tendency to ignorance should be abandoned in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling. So the Buddha says that the root cause why craving arises is because of this tree. And craving, is not just about pleasant feeling. Like the title of today's Dhamma talk, is where it says that we are seeking pleasure, but at the same time we are also averse to pain. But whenever there's pleasure, we chase after it. But when there's pain, we are averse to it. So you can see from this sutta, right? This craving is not just about pleasant feeling. So if anything, the pain arises. Actually, there's craving as well. What is this craving? The craving is actually the craving for us to remove, and to be separated, from this unpleasant or pain, right? We want the pain to go away, So that itself is also craving, right? Because you crave for pain to go away. So the Buddha says that this underlying tendency to aversion should be abandoned with regard to painful feeling, and the underlying tendency to ignorance should be abandoned with regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling. So you see here, the Buddha then highlights that the reason why craving, and clinging arises, is because of feeling, So the Buddha continues in this sutta that, if one does not understand feeling, the tendency of lust is present. If one does not understand feeling, the tendency to aversion, arises. And if you don't understand feeling, with regard to there's neither painful nor pleasant feeling itself, then, this, tendency to ignorance also arise, right? So that's why the Buddha says here, do not neglect clear comprehension. The wise man fully understands feelings in its entirety, So you can see the keywords here. One does not understand, So the Buddha actually then highlights the reason why feeling arises because of what? Because of ignorance, right? We are shrouded in darkness and ignorance of the intrinsic nature of existence. We do not understand. We ascribe a self, an atta to our five aggregates, as well as to external sankhara, external formations. We assign a self to all these. Sankharas, to formations. That's why we have the root cause. The underlying culprit or the perpetrator for this feeling is because of what? Because of ignorance, right? Because we have not been able to achieve the breakthrough to the Dhamma, or what Buddha calls the Dhamma abhisamanya. So that's why this sutta itself, actually talks about the understanding that's required with regard to feelings. So again, in this Samyutta Nikaya 36.4, the Buddha also talks about this painful bodily feelings. And here the Buddha says that. He says here, when an untaught worldling is afflicted by painful bodily feelings, right? He laments, he beats his breast, weeps, and is distraught. He's said to be an untaught worldling who cannot withstand the bottomless pit and cannot gain a foothold in it. Okay, so and the Buddha says that when a well-taught noble disciple is afflicted by painful bodily feelings, he will not worry or grieve or lament, and he will not actually be distraught. He's said to be a noble disciple who can withstand the bottomless pit, and has gained a foothold in it. So the Buddha in this sutta actually highlights about the painful bodily feelings, and it is the reason, and the reason why that we are not able to that we continue to have aversion towards this painful bodily feelings. The Buddha says because we do not understand the Dhamma as taught by the Buddha. Because then the Buddha, that's why the Buddha draws a distinction between a worldling as well as a well-taught noble disciple. Because a well-taught noble disciple would have actually been able to see that all conditioned phenomena arise because of causes and conditions, which is actually referring to the Sotapanna, right? So that's why the Buddha says that the reason why that we are enveloped in this round and round of existence in samsara is because of ignorance, because we don't see that the intrinsic nature of non-self in our five aggregates, as well as in the external sankhara. That's why the Buddha in this SN 36.4 it says that we continue to have this aversion to painful bodily feelings, and whenever it comes to pleasant feelings, then we then chase after it, we then crave for it, and we seek pleasure, if there is something that's pleasant. But if it's something that's not pleasant, like for example, if for example something unfortunate happens, that's where you become very distraught, you become very you become in a way you grieve, and you then feel very upset, or you feel very frustrated, and there's just a lot of this aversion that arises because of painful feelings, whether it's body or whether it is actually mind, all this. All these painful feelings arises, then you feel aversion. And then the reason because of that is because we don't actually understand the intrinsic nature of existence, the non-self nature. That's why, the Buddha then highlights that this is the root cause, which is actually the ignorance. And of course, if you read other suttas, right, and the Buddha then also highlights that, for example, in Iti Vuttaka number 14, the Buddha then highlights that the underlying reason why we go through this samsara is because of ignorance. This is then very much emphasized by the Buddha, and is in line with the suttas, earlier suttas that I've actually highlighted to you, and where the Buddha ascribes the reason why we react, to pleasant, painful, and neither pleasant nor painful feelings, is because of ignorance, because we don't understand, the truth, the intrinsic nature of existence. That's why, we keep clinging, onto a notion of self, with regard, to our five aggregates as well as to external formations, external sankharas. Because of this, we are not able to see through. We are not able to, in a way, cut through, the veil of ignorance, but we keep on being shrouded by ignorance, from existence to existence. So you can see here from Iti Vuttaka, Sutta number 14, the Buddha says, "Bhikkhus do not perceive any single hindrance other than hindrance of ignorance, by which humankind is so obstructed, for such a long time, and for so long that beings, run and wander in samsara. It is indeed through the hindrance of ignorance that humankind is obstructed for a long time, and runs through and wanders in samsara." The Buddha says, "No other single thing exists like the hindrance of delusion, which so obstructs mankind and makes it wander forever." Okay? So now that we know that ignorance is the root cause of why we actually are trapped in samsara, and and we are not able to in a way unchain and unshackle ourselves from this unending cycles of rebirth and of birth and death, right? So the next question is, how do we actually then in a way uproot, and how do we then in a way uproot this ignorance? How do we actually and how do we then how do we practice in order for us to be able to see through this veil of ignorance that has shrouded us for the longest time? How should we practice in order for us to actually then eradicate this ignorance? And the answer we can find from this Samyutta Nikaya SN 56.21. The Buddha says, "It is because of not understanding and not penetrating the Four Noble Truths that you and I, have roamed and wandered through this long course of samsara." Okay, and And of course, the Buddha says, what for? It's not understanding the noble truth of suffering, the origin of suffering, and the cessation of suffering and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Okay, so these are the four noble truths, that the Buddha says. Is because we don't understand this four noble truths. That's why we are still shrouded in ignorance. Okay, so the Buddha has actually provided the answer. Okay, because of not seeing as they are the Four Noble Truths, we have wandered through the long course in the various kinds of birth. And now these truths have been seen, the conduit to existence is severed. Cut off is the root of suffering, and now there's no more renouncement. Okay? Again, in this SN 56.25, the Buddha again highlights the importance of why we should be able to see through these four noble truths. Because if you're able to see through the four noble truths, the Buddha says that you have actually attained the breakthrough to the Dhamma. That means what the Buddha says, the Dhamma abhisamanya. You're able to already break through, to the Dhamma, to the core, and to the real crown jewel of what the Buddha is trying to actually teach, in all the suttas. If you're able to see through to this Dhamma, then you would have, the Buddha says then you would actually have attained the Sotapatti, right? The Dhamma eye has arisen in you, So in order for you to even to attain this breakthrough to the Dhamma, the Buddha says that you must be able to, first of all, understand experientially, the Four Noble Truths. It's not just understanding the Four Noble Truths superficially, by just looking at it and reading it, but it is actually for you to see through the Four Noble Truths experientially, and in a way, personally, directly, and experientially, So that is something that is actually very, very critical and very crucial, for us to understand, what the Buddha is actually saying here. That the Buddha says, I say the destruction of taints is for one who knows and sees, not for one who does not know and see. The Buddha says, for one who knows what, for one who sees what, the destruction of the taints come about. Then the Buddha continues, the destruction of the taints comes about for one who knows and sees this is suffering, this is the origin, this is a cessation of suffering, and this is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Okay, so the Buddha again highlighted that to be able to see through, to this Four Noble Truths, is something that is very fundamental, that must be able, that one must be able to see through experientially, and understand, what this Four Noble Truths actually means and what it entails, in order for you to be able to achieve the destruction of taints. So the Buddha says, therefore, bhikkhus, exertion should be made to understand the Four Noble Truths. So you can see here the Four Noble Truths is something that's very, very important, that's pivotal, for us to actually understand and able to cut through to the veil of ignorance, in order for us to, in a way, end this whole cycle that actually leads from ignorance itself. You go through the other things, like from ignorance, it goes to volitional formation, sankhara, and then from sankhara, then it leads to consciousness, and leads to nama rupa then leads to the six sense bases, then leads to then the contact then leads to feelings, right? So from feelings itself, that's where you actually then you develop this craving for feelings, and also aversion to unpleasant feelings, and so that's where these feelings arises. Because of these feelings, we have craving and clinging, and then it then leads to being, and then birth, death, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. So that is the whole chain. But what is the root cause of this attachment, this craving and clinging, to happen? It's because of ignorance. And for us to actually to cut through the veil of ignorance, we must understand the Four Noble Truths, which is actually emphasized in the suttas time and time again, by the Buddha, that this Four Noble Truths must be actually be fathomed, must be understood, not just superficially and not just at the very at the reading at the reading level, but you must actually be able to practice it, and be able to see through to it, experientially and directly and personally. Okay, that is actually what the Buddha highlights now. And in this SN 56.35, again the Buddha highlights about the importance of understanding the Four Noble Truths and the importance of able to achieve the breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths. If you understand, if you look at the paragraph here, it says to make the breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths to which you had not broken through before. Here in this sutta, right, is this SN 36.35. What the Buddha is actually saying here is, if somebody were to live for 100 years, and every day, someone, this person who lives for 100 years, and each day during his life, in the morning, he will someone will actually strike him with 100 spears. At noon, 100 spears. In the evening, in 100 spears. And this person is being struck day after day, by 300 spears every day. And throughout this every day of his lifespan, 100 years, he will be struck by spears, 300 spears every day, for the rest of his life for 100 years, and if after being struck, by these 300 spears every day for 100 years, right, at the end of 100 years, he's able to make through to the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha says, that this person should actually accept the offer. You should actually accept the offer to be struck by these 300 spears every day for the rest of your 100 years. If you are able to achieve a breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha says you should actually, you should actually accept and agree to what has been offered. Okay. And again, in other sutras, like for example, in Iti Vuttaka 103, the Buddha also highlights here, that if someone were to actually call himself a Brahman, or contemplative, means like somebody, who is a renunciant, right, who actually practices for the liberation, from suffering, right. The Buddha says that if the path that's taught by this Brahmin or contemplative does not have the Four Noble Truths in it, then the Buddha says that then this person cannot actually call himself a Brahman or contemplative. So again, in this Iti Vuttaka, the Buddha again highlights the importance of these Four Noble Truths. If anybody were to teach a path that leads to ending of suffering, and he says that this teaching is actually something a wholesome path that will lead to ending of suffering. But if this path doesn't have the Four Noble Truths, then the Buddha says that also is, you cannot then even he himself cannot call himself a renunciant or or a Brahman or a contemplative. Again, in SN 56.44, just to also share with you a sutta, where the Buddha says, if you actually do not break through to the Four Noble Truths of dukkha, as present, without having broken through to the origin of dukkha, to the cessation of dukkha, and the path leading to the cessation of dukkha, the Buddha says, if the person does not actually been able to see through to this Four Noble Truths in terms of this, the dukkha, the origin, the cessation, and as well as the path, the Buddha says, if he were to say that, I will bring about the right ending of dukkha, if he does not understand and see through to the Four Noble Truths, the Buddha says that would be an impossibility. It's just that someone were to say that without having built the lower story of a gabled building, I will put up the upper story. That means, before you even build the upper story, before you even actually build the lower story of the building, right? You see that I will actually build the upper story. The Buddha says that is actually impossible. That's why the Buddha says if anyone were to say that I'm able to achieve this ending of suffering, but he himself has actually not achieved the breakthrough to the true Dhamma, the Buddha says that's impossible. Just like building. Constructing a building, where you want to build second floor, but you have not achieved the ground floor yet. Okay, and you can see here from Anguttara Nikaya 5.15, the Buddha says the Buddha speaks of the 5 powers. the power of faith, energy, mindfulness, concentration of wisdom. Okay. And the Buddha, of course, that talks about the power of faith is actually seen in the factors of stream entry, because the stream entry actually has got this unshakable faith in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, right? And the energy is actually on the four striving. The mindfulness is actually on the four foundations of mindfulness. And the power of concentration or samadhi is actually on the four jhanas. And lastly, the Buddha says, and where is the power of wisdom to be seen? The power of wisdom is to be seen in the Four Noble Truths, you see. So that's why for us to be able to achieve this, the breakthrough to the Four Noble Truths, it's actually critical for us to remove, to cut through to the veil of ignorance. And then, of course, the next question that we need to then ask ourselves, is how do we actually then, practice, in order for us to be able to see through to the Four Noble Truths, right? How do we then practice? What must we actually be able to see, know and see in order for us to, cut through to the and be able to achieve the breakthrough of Dhamma, and for us maybe to and also for us to for us to have the Dhamma eye arising in us, right? What is it that we need to? How is it we need to practice in order for us to be able to understand the Four Noble Truths, at the deep level, such that we are able to uproot the asavas, the taints. Then you can actually, to answer that question, you can refer to this SN 56.11 about the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta on the setting of the wheel of the Dhamma, by the Buddha, in Isipatthana at Varanasi, right? So if you see here, the Buddha talks about the first noble truth, okay, of suffering, of dukkha, and the Buddha says here, right, that birth is dukkha, aging is dukkha, death is dukkha, pain, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Association with the unbeloved ones is, or the unpleasant is stressful. Separation from the pleasant is stressful, And then in the end, the Buddha says, in short, the five clinging aggregates are stressful, which means the Buddha is saying, in order for us to understand the first noble truth, we must be able to see the five aggregates as dukkha, means your form, your feelings, your perceptions, your volitional formations and consciousness must actually you must actually see them in the context of dukkha. And how do we actually then see these five aggregates as dukkha, And just to share with you another sutta, also SN 22.60, where the Buddha actually then tells Mahali, that the five aggregates must actually be able to be seen in the in respect of in respect of dukkha, in order for one to be able to achieve a liberation, one must be able to contemplate and see through that the five aggregates are intrinsically dukkha. So how do you then see these five aggregates as dukkha? Seeing from the earlier sutta, that for us to be able to even understand the first noble truth, we must be able to see the five aggregates as dukkha, right? So how do we see the five aggregates as dukkha? Okay, so for this, we can refer to this sutta SN 22.122, where there is this conversation between Venerable Sariputta and Mahakotthita, and in short, what this Venerable Sariputta actually told Mahakotthita is if someone is striving to be a stream enterer, for example, you're striving to be to achieve to be a sotapanna, right? How should you practice in order for you to see the five aggregates? The Buddha, the Venerable Sariputta says that in order for you to even attain stream entry, you must be able to see the five aggregates in terms of non-self, you see. So in order for you to see these five aggregates as dukkha, you must be able to see the five aggregates as non-self, That is what the Buddha has actually taught, and we must be able to see anatta with regard to the five aggregates. Okay? And again, in SN 22.99 as well, on the leash itself, again, I mean, this is a pretty long sutta, but you can go back and refer to it, And what the gist of this sutta, is that what the Buddha says that you must be able to see the five aggregates in terms of non-self, because if you continue to view the five aggregates as having a self, then you are just like being tied on the leash, like a dog being tied on the leash, and you're just running round and round along a strong pillar, and you keep on running round and round, just like going through, the long journey in samsara, you're just journeying in samsara for the longest time, but you are not going anywhere. So it's because of what? Because you actually keep on looking at the five aggregates as having a self. So in order for you to be able to extricate or to be able to escape from samsara, you must be able to see the five aggregates in terms of non-self. That's why the Buddha in the end he says, the instructed noble disciple does not regard form as self, or feeling as a self, perception as self, or volitional formation as self, and consciousness as a self. So the five aggregates must be seen in terms of non-self. Okay, and again, in AN 4.45, again, the Buddha again highlights, gave a teaching to this Rohitassa. This Rohitassa was actually he's actually a dewa, and before he became a dewa, he was a very powerful rishi, that he was able to fly through the universe in the galaxies, and he was actually able to travel long distances. So he was actually looking for a place where no one grows old and no one dies, where people actually live forever and be there, be happy, be there, for the longest time and be happy, But the Buddha tells him that, actually that place, you cannot reach that place, but that place, where there is no more birth and death, which is Nibbana, right, lies within this fathom long of body, which is the 6 foot long body, which is actually your five aggregates, okay? So you see here, the Buddha spoke about, in order for us to see the first noble truth, we must be able to see the five aggregates as, as dukkha as well as non-self, But if you look at other suttas, like for example, SN 12.25, right? The Buddha also actually talks about, in order for us to attain liberation from samsara, right? The Buddha says, that you must be able to actually see the intrinsic nature, of this non-self, at the sixth sense basis. He says here, the Blessed One, my friend, has said that pleasure and pain are dependently co-arisen. Dependent on what? Dependent on contact. The Buddha says that this pleasure and pain arises because of contact. So what you want to understand by contact is actually where it is the coming together of the sense base as well as the sense object together with the consciousness, right? So that actually that is where contact happens, the phassa, where it happens. So the Buddha actually in this sutta says that we must also be able to see anatta at the sixth sense basis. Basically that's what the Buddha is saying. Other than the five aggregates, the Buddha also highlights that it must be actually seen in the sixth sense basis. So as you can see from here also in SN 35.3, the Buddha also talks about that you must be able to see that the sixth sense bases are actually non-self, the eye, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind is non-self. Okay, so this is also where we also need to be able to look at how the two dhammas actually converge. For example, earlier the Buddha spoke about the five aggregates, but here the Buddha spoke about being able to see non-self at the sixth sense basis. Okay. So then the question here is, maybe I'll run through to the. So the question here is, how do we actually then practice, in order for us to converge, the five aggregates and the sixth sense basis, because the Buddha spoke that if we want to attain attain liberation from samsara, right, you must be able to see non-self, in relation to 5 aggregates. And by the same time, the Buddha also spoke about the 6 sense bases, at the 6 sense doors. The sutta, where the Buddha actually then integrates these 5 aggregates with the 6 sense bases is actually in MN 148, where the Buddha spoke about this, the 6 sets of 6. The Chachaka Sutta. What the Buddha is teaching here is, whenever our 6 sense bases come into contact with any external sense objects, right? We must be able to contemplate non-self in relation to what we experience. So for example, if we see something that's pleasant, and lobha or greed arises in us, then we must be able to then contemplate that how does this craving arise? The craving arises is because of the feelings, the pleasant feelings, and how does this pleasant feeling arise? It's actually because of the contact. And how does contact arise? It's because of the sense base, and how does the sense consciousness? And how does the sense consciousness arise? It's because of the sense object, coming into contact with the sense base. So if you actually are able to contemplate this in this way through this, what the Buddha taught in this 6 sets of 6, which means you contemplate these 6 items in terms of, in terms of the sense object, the sense base, the sense object, the contact, in terms of the consciousness, the contact, the feelings, as well as the craving. If you're actually able to look at these 6 things at the 6 sense object, at the 6 sense basis, then the Buddha says that you would have been able to contemplate non-self, in relation to the 6 sense basis, and also contemplate the 5 aggregates at the same time. So because if you look at it, right, at every 6 sense door, once any object comes into contact with you, you are able to contemplate in terms of the body, which is actually your sense object, and then you also be able to contemplate the feelings, which is actually the pleasant or the unpleasant feeling, and you're able to contemplate the perception, because then you're able to understand, why you actually have that pleasant, unpleasant feelings because of perception, and you also be able to contemplate the volitional formations in terms of the craving, and also. But if you actually look at this, these 5 aggregates, in relation to 6 sense bases, you would actually be able to then integrate, the 5 objects into this 6 sense bases. So this is actually what the Buddha taught in terms of, how, we should be able to contemplate, the 5 aggregates, in relation to the 6 sense bases, and that is actually. Also, what is actually taught by the Buddha in other suttas as well. For example, in MN 146, where this Venerable Nandaka also spoke about the example of an oil lamp. Where how does this this flame come about? It's because of the oil lamp as well as the wick. And also the air, and because of that, there's a flame, So if you actually analyze this example, right, in terms of the oil lamp, you'll be able to understand and be able to, in a way, experientially verify, whether your five aggregates are actually non-self, through the earlier sutta, I spoke about the 6 sets of 6, right, where you actually contemplate the 5 aggregates through the 6 sense bases, and that's where you're able to then see the non-self nature of the 5 aggregates, through the 6 sense bases. And this is the same as what the Buddha spoke in, this MN, in this Nandaka Sutta, where the Buddha spoke about this oil lamp, this oil lamp, and how does the flame or come about, because of the various causes and conditions that need to be there in order for the oil lamp to have the flame. So that's where you understand the non-self nature. So as you can see here, the Buddha says, in order for us to uproot the fetters, we must be able to see the non-self nature, in terms of our I, in terms of the form, in terms of the consciousness, and also the contact, feelings, perceptions, and that's where you're able to see the non-self nature, in the five aggregates. It's through the practice of seeing the five aggregates through the six sense bases, like what I showed you just now in the MN 143, on the six sets of six. So as you can see here, also the Buddha also spoke about how you should abandon the taints. Then for someone to be able to abandon the taints, one must be able to see the I, the form, the consciousness, the contact, the feelings, perceptions. All these you must be able to see the five aggregates. In terms of non-self nature. Okay. Because once you're able to see the non-self nature in the five aggregates, then you'll be able to attain, this, in a way, equipoise. You will not actually be drawn, whenever a pleasant feeling arises, then you will not actually then cling to it, or when there's a unpleasant feeling arises, then you will not be averse to it, because you understand that all these that you're experiencing are actually non-self, right? In relation to the five aggregates. So the Buddha actually then, for example, in MN 152, right? The Buddha then also highlights this is how we should actually practice, by seeing the non-self nature, in whatever that we experience through our sense doors. You see here the Buddha says, and how Ananda is there a supreme development of the faculties in the training of the noble ones. You see the Buddha says here, when the mendicant sees a sight with their eyes, in them arises what is agreeable, disagreeable, on what is both agreeable and disagreeable. See, whenever you see something with your six sense basis, right, you are able to see, you understand now, if something is pleasant, then you know that you develop a clinging for it. When something is unpleasant, you develop aversion to it. So for a Putujana, right, this is how they will react. They will cling to whatever that's pleasant, whatever is unpleasant, they will be averse to it. But for a noble disciple, because they know that this is non-self, whatever that they experience, whether it is pleasant or unpleasant, they know that it's actually conditioned, crude, and dependently arisen. So they look at it as non-self. There's no intrinsic self to it, and it's subject to change, and due to causes and conditions. So there's nothing intrinsic to it. There's nothing permanent to it. So that's how they are able to achieve equanimity, when it comes to whatever that's pleasant, unpleasant. So that's how they develop in order for them to be able to escape from samsara. That's what the Buddha says. This is how you should actually develop in order for you to escape, and put an end to this endless cycle of birth and death. Okay? And even for the monks also, you can see from MN 151, right? Whenever the monks actually go on Pindabat, right, the Buddha also asked them to practice this meditation on non-self, which is actually the meditation of emptiness. So, for example, the Buddha says, along the path, when someone actually gives food to you, you need to actually reflect on your, in your mind, this citta nupassana, right? Whether you actually have any greed, aversion, or just defilements that arise in you. For example, someone gives you something that you like a lot, then you feel attachment to it, and you become very attached and cling, to whatever that you like to eat. But if someone gives you something that you don't like, then you develop aversion, And the same goes for your nose, your ear, and then your tongue, your touch, and your mind, So at this sixth sense basis, right, you need to ask yourself whether you actually feel anything, or whether you feel, whether you actually have any defilements that arise through loba and dosa, and moha as well, and you need to then be able to practice non-self, in order for you to, not react, with, greed, or aversion, or loba, or dosa, or moha, and that is the way for you to end this unending cycle of birth and death, So this thing about developing equanimity, is actually mentioned in many suttas by the Buddha. Like for example in SN 35.199, the Buddha spoke about this tortoise. If you actually allow yourself to react with loba and dosa to whatever that's pleasant, unpleasant, then the Buddha says you're just like a tortoise, who has extended your head and a limb out, and a jackal, will actually feast on you, and that jackal is like Mara, just like what Ajahn Chah says, that, if you shouldn't let the chicken out of the chicken coop, it's the same concept, but it's based on the sutta about this tortoise, that you should actually practice this non-self contemplation and meditation, which the Buddha says essentially is also the contemplation of emptiness. It is sunyata, because when you look at non-self, essentially there's no self. Everything arises through causes and conditions, and in a flux, and there's no permanent unchanging self. So actually, you're contemplating on sunyata, on emptiness. So when you look at emptiness, right, that's where you develop this equanimity. You don't cling to it anymore, and you see everything as non-self. And that's where you're able to be able to in a way to have this equanimity, and maintain equanimity in the face of whether it's pleasure or pain. You are still able to be very equanimous, and you don't react. And that's where you slowly then are able to then eradicate your defilements slowly, and attain the various stages of enlightenment, and be able to then get out from samsara and to escape from samsara, And even like for example, in Udana 1.10, right, in Bahia Sutta, I'm not sure whether you remember this sutta where the Buddha talks about, he taught Bahia, right, that whatever is seen should just be the seen, Whatever is heard should just be the heard, and whatever that's cognized should be just whatever that's cognized. So this is what the Buddha actually also taught Bahia, to develop this contemplation of non-self, and also be able to understand, and to able to realize the empty nature of all conditioned phenomena. So that is what the Buddha highlighted, in terms of the path, to be practiced, okay, in order for us to be to escape from samsara. And of course, the Buddha then says, in order for you to be able to practice this non-self contemplation, you must be able to read and watch your mind at all times. In this, in 35.153, the Buddha actually highlights that, if you're able to watch your mind, constantly, you are able to attain arahantship even in this very lifetime. So this is where the Buddha taught, in terms of always, looking at your mind in terms of just like a person looking in a mirror, whether there's any blemish in it or not. If you see that, there's actually loba, dosa, moha in your mind, then you must, make the effort, to actually eradicate this and to actually to uproot these defilements, just like as though your head was on your turban was on fire, So this is where the Buddha says that you must be able to read your mind, to watch your mind at all times. Just like what the Buddha mentions in this AN 3.105, that if you don't actually guard your mind well, this is just like the peak of a roof of a house that's actually not properly thatched, and because of that the water seeps through, and everything becomes wet and soggy. It's just like us, if you don't guard our mind well, that's where all our the mind, body, and verbal actions, are becomes unwholesome. So guarding the mind well is also something that's important, so in order for us to practice the contemplation of non-self. So all in all, based on what I've shared with you in terms of the suttas, right? The Buddha has actually given, a very a holistic, teaching, in terms of the spiritual path that must be practiced in order for us to, to be liberated from this samsara, and so therefore, it is our duty, in order for us to practice it well, and in order for us, to be able to be liberated from this samsara, and in order for us to be able to see through the Four Noble Truths, and have a glimpse of Nibbana, where we are able to attain Sotapanna in this very lifetime, then we know that we are safe, that we only need to be in this samsara for only up to 7 lifetimes, and we know we are able to then be able to eradicate this all these defilements, and attain final liberation.